there, my name is Denise Cooper and I work for NearForm on InnerSource, and I am talking today to James McLeod. Hi, James.
Hi, Denise. Good afternoon to you.
Yeah, it's great to see you. Is it raining where you are?
No, it's bright and sunny. I'm actually in the middle of central London at the moment, looking out the window with blue sky and a few wispy white clouds.
We have the usual beautiful cleansing rain of Ireland. It's a nice soft day here today. So great. And I think that this is your second day at your new job. Is that true?
Yeah, it's absolutely right. So I'm now working for FINOS, who are the FinTech Open Source Foundation, and I've taken the position of Director of Community. So not only has my role within the open source community shifted from where I was an engineering lead at Lloyds Banking Group, but now I can actually devote all of my time to it, which is just a godsend for me because I absolutely love working with people and working within the community. And
so you've done the magical thing. You figured out how to get paid to do open source full time. Congratulations.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, now my hobby is now my job.
That's fabulous. That's a great way to work. That's kind of what happened to me too. It was so long ago now, it's hard to remember, but it definitely makes it better to work if you are, passionate about the way that you're working. I mean, it's always hard to work, but it definitely makes it better, makes it easier.
I totally agree.
We're met today to talk about the possibility of InnerSource in a regulated industry. And FINOS, of course, a lot of those members, I've spoken at FINOS events before, and a lot of the membership is really concerned about the clash or the perceived clash between the regulations that they live under in the financial world and the desire to have a more free-flowing collaboration style and take advantage of open source. And I've seen some very unnatural things proposed as ways to get around that problem. And so I really wanted to talk to you today because I think you have a great story about how easy it is to get it right if you approach it from the right place.
That's right. Yeah, absolutely.
So as is well known, I worked for PayPal, and that's where we started implementing InnerSource. And although PayPal is subject to many of the same regulations, it's a slightly different deal because although they are a bank in Europe, they are not a bank in their prime market, which is the US. And so they can behave more like an app provider. I mean, there's still consumer trust and there's still, relationship building with their customers and all those things still exist, but they don't have quite the same regulatory pressures from outside except in Europe. So anyway, we leveraged that difference to get them to be more relaxed about the fact that they were, going to try to do this collaboration thing. So tell me a little bit about how your recent experience and how you found the company that you joined and why you thought they needed InnerSource.
Yeah, no problem. So previous to my role as Director of Community at FINOS, I was an engineering lead at Lloyds Banking Group. Now, I've been a software engineer for all of my career. I did a computer science degree here in London, actually not that far away from where I'm sitting right now. I'm right outside the BT Tower, and that's where my university was based, funnily enough. And my progression through software engineering has led me into many different organizations that have started from being startups all the way through to being large enterprises. And the one thing that before starting within financial services that all of the organizations I worked for previously had in common is that all of the engineers were able to collaborate over the desk. And we were able to see inside each other's repositories, and we were able to give, peer-to-peer direction to each other. And then I joined Lloyds Banking Group. So I joined there as a consultant initially, and then I actually decided that I would like to work there full time. So I converted to a permanent employee. And now, just through the type of person who I am, through my background, through startups and then through, different sized organizations, I just I just acted through my normal behaviors of getting the engineers together who I knew to talk about, their difficulties, what they would like to do moving forward and how they can actually improve themselves, which was actually quite different to the behavior that some financial services organizations were allowing their engineers to do. Now, I was actually really lucky because within Lloyds Banking Group, when I was there, and also, as the company is right now, they're actually encouraging engineers and everybody, to be quite honest, to come together in order to evolve a real community spirit. So this wasn't an engineering only thing. It was actually everybody across all disciplines. It was actually decided as part of Lloyds Banking Group's digital transformation that all disciplines across the organization should learn to communicate and, share ideas with each other. And so my initial taking advantage of this, opportunity that we were given was to create an engineering guild and actually bring engineers together to talk about the difficulties that they are actually finding within the organization.
Right.
And that was the very first step into InnerSource for me.
Great. Well, I know because we've spoken before that you already had a history previous to joining Lloyds of organizing meetups and helping build community generally across London. And, you still have a natural bend for herding the cats because I think you believe, as I do, that we're better together. We can get more done if we know each other.
Absolutely. And I don't know whether it's a generation thing. I don't think it is a generation thing, but I've always been drawn. I could be
your mom, so I don't think so.
I'm not sure about that.
I think it's more a desire, and there are people who are wired to connect, and who that's what's exciting to them is seeing people get better together, seeing all the boats rise.
Exactly. And so as soon as Twitter started in the early noughties, and when Facebook, kind of appeared, and even, before that with MySpace and Friends Reunited, and then when LinkedIn, appeared, I was always on there, kind of reconnecting with the people who I knew from school, and then connecting with people who I knew through industry. And so, like what you were saying, this kind of need to connect with people and share, whether you're in the same room or whether it's virtually, has always been within me. I've always been a real big networker, both, going to meetups and organizing my own, and also online, through sharing tweets and sharing information. And that's how I actually got into creating my React.js meetup here in London. It was because it was actually a really great way of bringing those two worlds together, which were, we can meet online through whatever social media presence you have, as a professional developer, and then we can all get together, in a meeting room or in a hall or at an event and actually share face to face. And this was the great thing about the guilds that we actually formed within Lloyds Banking Groups, because even though they weren't heavily sponsored in the same way as a meetup would be sponsored, with drinks and food and, presenters, it was still that opportunity to get everyone together in order to share and collaborate. And it was through that sharing and collaborating where we started, saying to ourselves, it's really great that we can actually come together and, share within the guild. But wouldn't it be awesome if we could also share within code? Because that is actually where software engineers and engineers in general really come to life. It's where not only you can come together and talk, but it's when you can actually come together even with your headphones on, and actually collaborate within the same repositories as all of your colleagues around your desk and in your teams, and also with colleagues who maybe you don't know. They might be on a different floor to you, or they might be in a different building elsewhere, within the organization, or potentially even in a different country, so they could be, an engineer in India or the US or Australia. But that was the direction in which we wanted to travel within Lloyds. And that is why we started as a guild, looking at all of the different systems of collaboration that there are within the industry that we could actually bring into the organization in order to start removing the systems that we had in place at that time that stopped us from collaborating. And so, that's where our journey, into GitHub Enterprise started, and our journey away from, other siloed types of repos, etc., actually started to end.
Yeah, I love GitHub. I think it's most of the companies that are taking out GitHub Enterprise accounts, company-wide accounts, they're hoping to get the InnerSource effect, but they just don't. Until recently, they didn't have words for what they were trying to get. But it must be noted that all code management systems can be configured to make it possible to do InnerSource. GitHub has a leg up because it's so easy to then transition your work to open source once you decide that you want to do that. And a lot of the way that it's built presupposes that you're using fairly transparent collaborative methods.
Yeah. So you are right.
Yeah, it's important to remember, because we don't want people we want people to realize that they can start where they're at. I know some really big companies that have done it on Bitbucket. Technically, open source started on CVS. It is possible to do it. It's just not as easy. So
yeah, you're absolutely right. So we did actually go around and we looked at GOGS, we looked at GitLab, we looked at Gerrit, we looked at Bitbucket, we looked at Git, without anything, just Git as you would use as a development team. And the only reason why we decided that GitHub would actually be a good answer for us is because, number one, a lot of the members of the guilds were also open source collaborators on the outside of the organization. And we all knew each other through the meetup that I organized, ironically. And then number two, we didn't want a context switch between my internal developer persona within Lloyds, who comes to work, codes for, the team within work, and then our open source personas as well. So we wanted to use a system that we actually recognized and understood outside of work, the same as we would use inside of work as well.
Yeah. That's a really big selling point for GitHub, for sure.
Yeah, but I also know teams who do use, the other systems of collaboration, and they're actually really successful on it. So I know people who, are on Bitbucket and they wouldn't think, about swapping to anything else because of the Jira and Confluence integration. And
right. The trick, though, when you get a new code management system in, the trick is to keep the forces of control from just reproducing whatever the system was before, where all that control existed. Like, it's possible to configure GitHub to be every bit as restrictive as whatever came before. And yes, you have to fight that tendency.
And this is the interesting thing, because we were talking about, how do we actually, because financial services is regulated, how do we actually, make sure that the regulators are happy with the endeavors that we're going through in order to be more collaborative. And this is where making sure that your working group or the people who are involved in the transformation aren't just engineers. Because like what you're saying, it's very easy for the fist to come down and for the system that you choose, whether it's GitLab, Bitbucket or GitHub, to be locked down just the same as where you were journeying from. And so this is where the group who were involved in the transformation started to include people from cybersecurity and people from risk, and also other people from across the organization, including product owners and people who actually, owned the output that engineers were producing throughout, their day within the team, because we wanted to make sure that it wasn't seen as a risk, and we weren't mavericks, bringing in the next best thing, within engineering. We wanted to not only do what was needed for the engineers who were using the system, but we also wanted to make sure that we brought everyone along on the journey as well, and also call into question regulation that people thought existed just because that's how the team have been doing it for years, and actually have people on our side who can actually go through and say, well, actually that regulation doesn't really exist. But if you're able to provide us, audit trails, and also a consistent log, people, also within the group Active Directory, for instance, so all of these security mechanisms, providing they're all documented and people can find them, we're able to move through and actually introduce the system. I won't say there was a big bang explosion. We didn't go from lights out to lights on overnight. And it's still continuing to happen, even now. But even with those first seeds planted, we're able to yield some pretty interesting and big results, which is just spectacular considering a lot of teams couldn't do anything. And so, yeah, the evolution into InnerSource is actually extremely possible, providing that you have the right people on your team.
Right. So let's talk about that for a minute. So I know from speaking to you before that there was support for this through the CTO's office and that you got some air cover from senior management.
Yeah.
But you also said something that I almost never hear, which is that middle managers were not really a deterrent to this implementation. We hear a lot about how hard it is to get that particular class of people to come on board because they are often protecting the status quo and they're not in a big hurry to, upend the apple cart.
Yeah.
So you didn't have that experience. Tell me about that.
No. And the reason that we didn't is exactly for the reason why the CTO actually gave us air cover. Now, as part of the Lloyds digital transformation, we wanted to transform engineering from being a back office role into being part of the organization. And actually that was really key because that recognition that engineering was actually, I'm not going to say central because I don't want to, put engineering above and beyond everything else. But, recognizing that engineers, do have a voice and do have an opinion was actually the first step for us to be able to, bring the people on board who may have otherwise said, oh, this is too risky, you're going to risk our deliverable at the end of the month. By having, a voice at the C-suite level, that actually enabled us to be able to not necessarily use authority to kick people out the way, but it enabled us to be able to start thinking differently about how engineers and people within technology engaged with other parts of the business and started to really educate the reasons why. And it all comes down to that. It's not because people outside of engineering wanted to put blockers or, stop change. It was because they didn't understand the reasons why. And so not only did the CTO give us the opportunity to engage in those conversations, but we also needed to think about how do we actually remove the complexity from our own language so the people who need deliverables, delivering at the end of the month or at the end of the week, got what they needed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I totally hear you.
So yeah, we kind of started the conversation. We really did move into that space.
Yeah, it's how you said it to me when I talked to you the other day was about keeping a product focus. So it sounds like Lloyds woke up to the fact that the software has eaten the world, and that makes the engineers not just a tool you use, but they're actually, a very important part of the process of coming up with products and solutions that actually, hit the mark, right? And part of the important thing is that they have enough psychological safety to feel like they're not going to get castigated for deciding to collaborate because it's more efficient, right?
Absolutely. And that was also the same for the Lloyds design team as well. They were also given a voice And they're also able to demonstrate how the customer should be at the center of all of your user journeys. And so not only did engineering get a voice for saying, this is how we can become more effective and efficient, increase our velocity whilst also driving quality, but our designers and other teams were able to put the customer at the center of all of the Lloyds products and actually create applications that were very customer focused in order to give people a different experience through finance. And then through all of these different communities and guilds and, mechanisms, including InnerSource, of which one of the InnerSource projects that we had within Lloyds also included designers as well. And before you know it, InnerSource isn't just an engineering thing, it's actually a company-wide thing, because you're pulling lots of different people into it. And you're actually getting some really interesting results as a result of, that type of collaboration.
Yeah, that's fabulous. So now I know that you did a series of road shows when you were explaining across the company how to do this. Talk a little bit about how that all worked.
Yeah, it's really interesting because as I was saying before, the InnerSource journey started with a group of engineers coming together within a guild saying we need to be able to collaborate. It wasn't a hierarchical push. We didn't have, the CTO saying we've got to adopt InnerSource, go out and figure it out. What do you need to do? It actually started, amongst the team. Now, because there were a limited number of people who understood it and really understood the advantages, not only did we need to start communicating to our local teams about, how we're evolving, in terms of engineering and bringing, GitHub, GitLab, Bitbucket or whatever into the teams and what that would mean. But as an engineering presence, we needed to be able to start broadcasting our direction and also start bringing a lot of other stakeholders on board. And so we kind of transformed ourselves from being an introverted bunch of engineers who would have our headphones on. We would be, writing our code in JavaScript or Java or .NET or, whatever it may be. And we actually started writing decks, whether it was in PowerPoint or whether it was in, Google or however you do your decks. And we started, number one, just, going into different stakeholder groups and presenting to maybe a team of senior managers. Then we started talking to the C-suite and, started broadcasting our message, a little bit broader and a little bit bolder. And then we started doing offsites where we would have lots of different engineering teams from across Lloyds banking group that included front-end developers, people working, within cloud or hybrid cloud or, maybe on mainframes to middle tier developers, and we started not only talking about InnerSource, but we also started bringing external people in who demonstrated InnerSource and also the people who provide the system. So we had guest presenters from lots of different organizations. And then we were thrown the challenge with, another one of our culture and capability team to create a hackathon that not only broadcasted the message of, what it is, but also gave people from across the organization the opportunity to practice it, so learn how to do it. And so that's where the roadshow kind of like started. That's where the hackathon kind of like went around to different hubs within Lloyds Banking Group, and it's continuing to do so. And we're making sure, or we did make sure, because I'm actually part of FINOS now, just to remind myself. That within the hack, you actually demonstrate the practice of collaborating together and publishing and doing pull requests, and, kind of working amongst the team, solving problems together, and everything that you would expect within that InnerSource type way. I think you're saying that you set up contests. Hackathons are sort of contests, right? And I think you're saying that you modeled the behavior you wanted to see by rewarding it extrinsically through a hackathon. Yes. The hackathon itself brought engineers from across the UK together. We put the teams together, through our own experiences because we wanted to, number one, not have people working together who already knew each other. We wanted people to get to know each other. And we wanted to make sure that the team experience was kind of quite equal. So we had senior people in with, more juniors and grads so people could learn off of each other. But then we also set challenges that weren't normal, everyday, Lloyds feature team stories to complete. They were kind of quite fun, creative challenges that didn't relate to your everyday work because we wanted it to be a fun event as well and not another day in the office. And we kind of kept it to a single day but what we did on the lead up to it was give people loads of education and loads of brown bag sessions, loads of lunch and learns. We onboarded people into the systems that they needed to be able to use. We, ran streaming seminars over WebEx, and we had, a really good lead time moving into the event. And so the hackathon was kind of like the one-day event, but stemming from that, we had, lots of other activities happening outside of that as well. And everything was about, InnerSource and all of those different systems that the engineering teams were moving into. And if I'm going to be really honest, even the mechanism of being able to do this wouldn't exist unless, we had that executive air cover for people just to come together and start working together. And so that's what, people just sharing ideas actually gets to. You can start things as, 1, 2, or 3 people around a table and actually grow it into something quite spectacular.
Yeah, well, it takes enlightened management. It sounds like Lloyd's has a clue, which is great to hear, because they're my insurance, my car insurer, as I told you. Yeah. Nice to know they have a clue. It's good. There's a lot of companies that are so hung up in their fear cycle that they can't quite get past it to get to this place of noticing that it would be really beneficial to learn how to do this. So kudos to them for that. I'm sure you helped a lot in pushing that idea forward.
Yeah, absolutely.
You and the engineers.
That's why my career has evolved into the FinTech Open Source Foundation, because I truly believe that all financial services organizations can do this. Plus also not just the big banks, the fintechs and also the technology companies who can help support this transition, by using their systems or other systems that can actually enable this.
Well, you had the experience of having real allies among your consultants, and as you know, I'm kind of on a tear to get at the consulting companies and get them to understand how to do this. And when I'm saying the consulting companies, I mean the really big ones, because my thing is, I feel like this is a better way to write software. It just is. And I think open source proves that. But I also believe that there are not enough engineers that get to do this because they're stuck in companies where this kind of collaboration is feared still. And it's so inefficient and so kind of soul-effacing to work that way once you have done the other thing, that I'm hopeful that we can get everybody to start doing their software engineering in this way. Partly because it means more people will be trained in collaboration and feel comfortable. Partly because I believe that it's a better way to work. But also, the kids that you can hire now, people that are just getting out of school, they all want this. They've had the internet forever. They want to work on it. They want to collaborate. They've had open source for most of their lives. And they think this is how people should be able to work. So the new workforce is going to, I think, push this pretty deep. But the place to start, if I want to scale it, is with consultants, large consulting organizations that don't know how, because they get employed to help people build community, but they don't really know what they're doing yet. So I feel like we have to infiltrate them. So tell me about your positive consultant ally experience.
Yeah, absolutely. So the very first thing when I started working with consultants was leave badges at the door. So whether you're working for IBM, whether you're working for Accenture, whether you're working for Wipro or TCS or, Sapient, there weren't kind of groups of partners. It wasn't that you were a consultant in amongst, a Lloyds engineering team. Everybody was seen as kind of like an equal contributor, which meant that everybody's, ideas were good ideas. And equally, everybody's accountabilities were shared, because I think it's very easy to put barriers up between people and just pass, the deliverable or the requirement or the story or however, you measure your work away from the permanent team of a financial services company. But actually what we wanted to do at Lloyds was grow our own technical prowess and bring all of that technology knowledge back into the teams. So an engineer from Lloyds Banking Group would be as close to technology as an engineer from IBM or Accenture or Wipro or whoever. So that was actually a really good way of creating great relationships with people, because then you kind of remove, the us and them barrier. So if I'm talking to an engineer from any consultancy, but at a person level, we're actually sharing ideas and, collaborating technically, even if it's just...
And you're just engineers together.
And you just start engineering stuff together. Now, what that actually enabled me to do was build a really great trust relationship with the partners of Lloyds. So to the extent where, I was invited to, Las Vegas in order to speak at IBM Think, and I was invited, to GitHub Universe last year, to speak over there. I did have to submit the presentations as well. But it was really good because, we were kind of all on the same level and we were able to talk about, what I should talk about. And the teams also helped me shape my presentations. And it actually just became that, we were all just working together. But as I started to get to know people and as I started to ask for more things, I started to ask within all of the consultancies that we were working with for leads and contacts within them that also demonstrated the same kind of understanding or desire as me, to start collaborating and to start, kind of sharing things openly in the way that I do. So what I found was, yes, there are, lots of big organizations, whether they're consultancies or whether they're, financial services companies or whoever they may be, pharmaceuticals even, who need to transform. But within them, there are some real diamonds, who think, the same way as we do, who are also trying to transform the companies that they're within. And if you kind of mine into that set of people and start collaborating with them, and then start broadcasting the message so their stakeholders can, start hearing the great outcomes that you're doing together, then I truly believe that, all of these organizations can shift, but it's just in the same way as we brought engineers together in Lloyds around a table, open source and even InnerSource, and this type of movement, which, like you said, isn't a movement for, the generations of engineers and developers who are coming out of university and even, are coming out into university. All of these people have been doing it, since they first started their computers and their mobile devices. But for people who, have been developing their careers within consultancies and want to change things, if you can find people who are doing similar things in other places, then you can also magnify your voice in that way. And so that's where my kind of consultancy experience has always been awesome, because through the network that I've created through those consultancies that I know, they've also contributed to the hackathons. They've enabled loads of stuff, and they're also really bright sparks as well, and their thinking is just as, bold or even more bold, than my own. And so you shouldn't kind of underestimate what some of these bigger organizations who have the reputation of being slow actually do have on the inside, because there's some real gems in there.
Yeah, well, it sounds like you're a pretty good miner too, though. I think you're right that, all the boats are rising in this movement and they're all cottoning on. Did you have people misunderstand what InnerSource was and push back based on a lack of understanding, or had you done such a good job of meme setting that you didn't run into that problem?
I would say that there's a learning curve on it. I would also say that it's a continuous learning curve as well. And so I wouldn't say that, we transformed the entire organization in order to develop in this way, in a collaborative way. But we did take enough of a step forward for it to be recognized and put into the roadmap for engineering, for instance, for Lloyds. And that also has allowed people to go out and investigate further what it actually means, because we're able to demonstrate it in a way that collaboration is also a way to increase quality, velocity, and be more efficient. And it's also a really good kind of agile principle as well. I mean, you're never going to be agile unless you learn how to communicate. So what we did was demonstrate the ability using a number of key, I'm not going to call them projects. They're like working groups rather than projects, because they don't actually particularly, they're not owned by, a project team. They're kind of like a horizontal, collaboration effort. And we then brought those projects into the hackathons and into all of our roadshows in order to really highlight the benefits of this. And so they kind of become a brand unto their own. And so if you can have an InnerSource project which develops a particular capability and has a particular type of value, and also asserts a particular type of impact, you can give it a name, and then you can give it a brand. And then you can talk about it more, and then people recognize what you're talking about. And then it just becomes part of your DNA, really. People don't even question who's working on it. All they know is that they're getting some great output and actually it has huge value. And before you know it, people are actually demonstrating InnerSource without knowing that it's InnerSource. It's just the way people are coming together in order to work. And that could be the same for Agile. It could be the same for cloud computing. It could be the same for open source. It's all to do with, I would actually say it's to do with social fabrics rather than, it's not a technical requirement. It's a social dynamic. It's how you bring great people together in order to collaborate and, move forward together.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I totally agree. I think that it solves so many of the backlog, bottleneck problems that we see in more traditionally run organizations. In fact, we started putting out T-shirts at PayPal that said, basically said, pull request beats feature request. Like, it's much better. But about addressing the whole organization, I was just actually having a conversation on InnerSource Commons, which we'll talk about InnerSource Commons next. But some new person was showing up and they wanted to know about extending the InnerSource idea into non-technical realms. And I told them the same story I told you about the bus schedule. Right? Yeah. You can get the whole company to start thinking in terms of everybody can clean up the campground. The only barrier is they have to learn how to use GitHub, but it's not that hard, No,
it's not. I mean, I suppose the only barrier really is licensing, because you do have to, provision, some form of fund in order to get licenses, for certain tools. But even then, it's about demonstrating value. And that's what we needed to do in order to get funds to fund our engineers for, GitHub at that time. But I'm pretty sure it's going to be the same for other systems. So when we started rolling out GitHub, which was actually, kind of one of the key systems for us to be able to demonstrate InnerSource, we actually did it on initially 1,000 licenses. So, we it was almost like an experiment. It was
yeah, that's what we advocate. And for scale, how many engineers do you actually have or actually work at Lloyds?
Yeah, so including our partner engineers, I believe it's around 15,000.
Yeah, so that's a pretty small percentage that you were addressing.
Yeah, oh, absolutely, yeah. But we had a real good test and learn environment that was actually given to us at the beginning of our digital transformation that kind of removed a lot of the risk around bringing new software into, an established network. It was almost like a secure cloud environment, but, it wasn't, part of the cloud. It was, the machines, we owned within our own data center. And within that environment, it just so happened that IBM, who were running that environment for us, also had a partnership with GitHub. And through leveraging, those diamonds that I was telling you before within IBM, we were able to install GitHub into this test and learn environment, and also get 1,000 licenses. We kind of begged and borrowed, for the funds in order to, bring those licenses in. But then we were able to invite engineers in who understood the value of working in this way, and we were able to demonstrate it and then sell it further forward. So where project teams were initially funding their own licenses for GitHub because all of their engineers were saying, we need to be in there, and they didn't really have a choice because, the engineering voice was too great, and people just said, okay, how much will it cost? And they bought the license for their engineering teams. We were then able to sell that into the organization. So the organization funded the licenses, so it became free at the point of use for all engineers. So right. It reversed the...
That's actually, that would be a good thing to explore with GitHub, figuring out a way to do that, right? So that it's, because they offer a volume discount. If you were to buy a site license, that would be, much less expensive. But companies start at the point that you're at, a sort of experiment phase, and then the scaling out, it gets uncomfortable because of the time it takes to get agreement. There's lots of, I think it doesn't have to be that way. If they saw that a company was tipping in that direction, maybe a package could be put together that allowed for expansion per need, that, individual groups would be more likely to sign up if it was as good a pricing as they're going to get for the whole company, for instance.
Absolutely. I mean, I'll never really argue that, and I don't think the team, GitHub or any, or GitLab or wherever would argue that once you actually introduce this type of system, the growth is actually, I would say, exponential. You kind of think that you're going to have like a real kind of shallow maturity curve as people on board. But as soon as engineers know that you've got this type of system now, basically the requests come in one after the other.
Yeah, it becomes a full-time job just to deal with it.
Yeah, but that's not a bad thing because within, digital transformation, you need to learn how to adapt. And if you're placing systems in there that, number one, provide value to your engineering teams, and number two, drive all of the, quality metrics or goals or OKRs that you have, then you need to learn how to adapt and to adjust your organization to be able to meet the demand of that. And that's what Lloyds basically had to do. The engineering demand actually demanded that the organization changed in order to meet it. And so you had a grassroots pull as well. You had ground cover as well.
Definitely.
Yes.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Okay, let's talk about InnerSource Commons since I said I would do it. So InnerSource Commons, for those who are listening to this that don't know, can be found at innersourcecommons.org. That's all one word, .org. And it's a place where you can go to meet with other company representatives who are also experimenting with InnerSource or have some experience with it. And it's kind of a self-help organization. It's a bunch of people who, the core of people who have stuck around and are very vocal are people that are evangelists for InnerSource as the change agency that they want to see in software engineering across the board, regardless of whether it's their employer or anybody else. They've kind of all agreed it's not secret sauce. It should just be the way we do things. So let's see if there's a way that everybody can win, right? And it's run under something called Chatham House rules, which means that if you ask a question there, they know not to publicize the nature of the question in a way that's going to damage the brand of the company you work for. We don't talk about companies or even about individuals that are members unless they've agreed to it. And over time, people have gotten the permission from their employers to become spokespeople. So we're just now, after creating a list of people who can come and talk in companies about InnerSource and have permission to share their stories. And of course, I've always also published a few books that have case studies of companies that have agreed to have those kinds of conversations. So I'm hoping we can add this Lloyds experience to that at some point. But also I'm hoping anybody who hears this and is curious about next steps will consider going to the InnerSource Commons and requesting a Slack account so that they can get in on the goodness. Now, have you gone and checked it out yet?
Yeah, so I have. I've been along to InnerSource and also downloaded, the PDF, the book that you actually wrote with O'Reilly. It's extremely helpful.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, it's good. And also the plethora of talks and materials that there are on YouTube as well. I mean, there's a lot out there, and there are a lot of people who have also followed similar patterns for getting companies into open source as well.
That's why we did it. I'm using every trick I learned in the 20 years of the development of open source to get InnerSource off the ground faster than it otherwise would happen organically, because, absolutely. Right. But also, I think you and I've already discussed, we posited that InnerSource was probably a gateway drug to effective open source for companies that couldn't figure out how to do it just on their own because they didn't know how to collaborate yet. And so they had a lot of mythology about how they were going to be bad at it or how it was going to run counter to their interests. And so they hold off. But my experience at PayPal is the proposals I was seeing for open source involvement after InnerSource became common in PayPal and generally accepted, they got better. They got much better. And so tell me what you think about that whole assertion that it leads to open source.
Yeah, definitely. I would say that open source is, the transition goal for people who are going through that path. So that is the same journey as Lloyds are going through at the moment as well. So starting from, a group of engineers talking about, doing collaboration, and then also practicing that through InnerSource has definitely, I wouldn't say 100% led to open source engagement, but it's definitely yielded a lot more positive communications about the benefit of it. Certainly in the collaboration space. But then, with open source, you've also got consumption of open source, and you've also got community engagement outside of an organization as well. And I think it's very easy for people to just focus on open source being about collaborating and publishing things out. But actually, by consuming InnerSource projects within the safety of your organization and knowing that you can use an InnerSource library that has been produced by engineers of your same organization also helps build the confidence that, you can actually use open source libraries in the same way. And that actually people who are really behind the collaborative effort, they're not the bogeyman. They're not people hiding in the dark corner or kind of trying to maliciously harm your company. They are people, like those who gathered, around the desk that I was at when we thought about collaborating on the inside. But they just so happened to join working groups in the same way as InnerSourceCommons.org is a working group of similar-minded individuals. And in the same way as FINOS, which you can find through FINOS.org, is, a community of like-minded fintechs and banks, and tech companies as well. And like I was saying before, it all comes back to, just getting those few people together in a room to talk about the value of doing this. And it just starts from there. But, equally, if people want to find out, what FINOS are doing in order to step into this regulated space, you might think that nothing's happening within financial services. But as soon as you kind of step into the FINOS world, you'll find out that there's a lot actually happening within the collaboration space. And there are lots of great players, within financial services already doing some really interesting stuff. So I'll definitely recommend, finding a working group to join, or, even just visiting the website and taking a look around.
Yeah, I think, I have attended FINOS events, and I've also agreed to come and talk at meetups for you and that kind of thing. So I totally agree that the most effective thing is testimonial, real life testimonial, and getting people over the hump of fear. There's so many misconceptions in old fashioned engineering organizations about the impact of InnerSource, like the belief that you have to take every piece of code that's ever given to you, regardless of the quality. It's sort of people's worst fears manifested, because change is hard, or change is scary for people. Well, but once they get in there, they get it, what it actually is, and a lot of the stuff they were afraid of gets dispelled pretty quickly.
Absolutely.
At least that's my experience.
And it all ties together with so open source doesn't sit on its own. It all comes down to DevOps, really, and DevSecOps, and how you actually give people within your teams accountability for engineering and making the right choices, and giving them the right tools in order to inform them. But that will move beyond the amount of time that we've got on this podcast. But
yeah, we'll do another conversation about that. But I know when I asked you what your advice was for other companies that wanted to do this, you said something very smart, which is go small and specifically show that you can provide value with a small number of people involved before you move, or in other words, crawl before you walk before you run.
Yeah.
We've been saying that too. Start with small experiment. Treat it like an experiment. Write out what you think is going to happen and what your method is. Stick to it for the defined period of time that you agreed to. Evaluate how it went and what you learned, including stuff that didn't go the way you thought it would, unexpected stuff that maybe was delightful or maybe was problematic, and then pivot and try it again until you've dialed in to your culture's special needs, and then you can scale.
I absolutely agree. It's so easy to go for your big bang application and open source that, but go for that small unit of code that demonstrates the ability to solve a huge amount of problems for a lot of people. Because then you'll have a small development team maintaining it, and you'll also be producing a lot of pleasure for the people who are using it.
Yeah. And then the other thing I always say is it profits nobody to do a big empty marketing splash about what a great thing you're doing. Strategic humility is so much more valuable.
I totally agree. Absolutely. Empty repos aren't that great.
Yeah. Is there anything else you want to tell me as we're wrapping up? I think we've done a pretty good job in this almost hour of talking.
Yeah. No, I've got nothing else other than to say thank you very much for inviting me on to speak this afternoon. I've really appreciated it. It's been a real blast. And I'm looking forward to, going on the circuit as director of community for FINOS.
Yeah. Well, I will see you at InnerSource Common, of course, if you run into anything interesting. And then, we'll get working on documenting this great story of your successes at Lloyds, and with you and the people who are maintaining it now. Yeah,
absolutely. I have to introduce everybody.
Yeah. Isn't it always the way? I know. I'm going to see you, I'm just one country over. I'll definitely see you.
Absolutely.
And at FINOS events as well. So thank you so much for your time. I just have to say that this series of podcasts about InnerSource, there'll be new ones coming pretty regularly. So if you're interested in this topic, if you are part of InnerSource Commons, there'll be regular updates that we're doing them, and there will also be, you could just bookmark it on the NearForm website, and there'll be new stuff showing up from time to time. And if you'd like to have either James or I come speak in your own organization, you can reach out to us through InnerSource Commons or through NearForm or through FINOS, because we're all in it together. And thank you very much for your attention, and I hope that you'll tune in again. Bye now.
Amazing. Thank you very much.